Messiah ben Joseph, Messiah ben David. Has anybody heard of that or read about this?
Yeah, I have.
Yes.
So before we dig and dive into, basically Zechariah chapter 9 today, we're going to read through. It's just a little Wikipedia about the tradition, kind of understand it. So here's what it says. In Jewish eschatology, Mashiach, or Messiah ben Joseph, and Messiah ben Joseph, also known as Messiah ben Ephraim, is a Jewish Messiah from the tribe of Ephraim and a descendant of Joseph. The figure's origins are much debated. Some regard as rabbinic invention, but others defend the view that it's the origins are in the Torah. Okay, so we'll see, right? And then it goes on, it says Jewish tradition alludes to four messianic figures called the four craftsmen from the book of Zechariah, which is kind of interesting, traditional English text. The four craftsmen are discussed in the Babylonian Talmud, Suk 52b, by Rabbi Hannah bar Vizna, attributed to Rabbi Simeon Hasidah, identifies these four craftsmen as Messiah ben David, Messiah ben Joseph, Elijah, and the righteous priest. Okay, each will be involved in ushering in the Messianic age. They are mentioned in the Talmud and in the book of Zechariah. Rashi, which is a middle-aged sage, Jewish sage, in his commentary on the Talmud gives more details. And Rashi explains that Messiah ben Joseph is called a craftsman because he will help rebuild the temple. Maimonides also commented on the Messiah ben Joseph's rebuilding the temple, and the roles of the four craftsmen are as follows. Elijah will be the herald of the eschaton. If necessary, Messiah ben Joseph will wage war against the evil forces and die in combat with the enemies of God and Israel. According to Stadia Gaon, the need for his appearance will depend on the spiritual condition of the Jewish people. In the Sefer Zerubbabel, and Sefer is the book or the scroll, in the Sefer Zerubbabel and later writings, after the death, a period of great calamities will befall Israel. And this might go along with the Great Tribulations, what they're probably alluding to. God will then resurrect the dead and usher in a messianic era of universal peace. Then the Messiah ben David will reign as a Jewish king during the period when God will resurrect the dead. With the ascendancy of rabbinic Judaism, the righteous priest has largely not been the subject of Jewish messianic speculation. Okay. Now, this is really interesting because if you look at how they're putting the puzzle together, we can see a lot of these. When you're a messianic, you can see a lot of these things. For example, the role of Joseph at the end of time. Clearly in Obadiah chapter 1 and verse 20, there's a role that Joseph plays that's separate from Judah. Okay. We know from Zechariah, the book of Zechariah and Zephaniah, that the Jewish people or the house of Judah will come into the land and occupy the land first. Okay. Now, if you look from the book of Revelations, you've got these two witnesses, right? And so these two witnesses bring in the rebuilding of the temple. So I think what they're alluding to is there is going to be a war where Joseph, Ephraim, is going to be involved with the enemies of Israel and in the rebuilding of the temple. I believe that to be true. I think Joseph is going to go through severe destruction and famine and a lot of stuff. And then toward the end, they're going to rise back up and destroy Esau. Okay. So there's a lot of things going into, as we study Zechariah 9, Jewish eschatology, and a lot of Jewish, these sages are trying to piece a lot of things that don't make a lot of sense. When we read about the four craftsmen a few chapters ago, it was hard to completely understand that. It's kind of eludes us a little bit. We've kind of made some interpretations on it, but this is as close to identifying the participants in it. So if this is true, and it possibly is true, I think in order for this to happen, Joseph and Judah have to work together in order to rebuild the temple. And I'll give you an example of this. When Trump named Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, the Jews began to call him Cyrus and Cyrus the Great. They refer to him as a messianic figure, right? And so with the role that Trump played, he played the same role as Cyrus is in basically preparing for the rebuilding of the temple. So that's where I see Ephraim being involved in the rebuilding of the temple. Second thing, we know that Messiah ben David will be Yeshua. He will be the Messiah. And for us, that's not up for debate. And for them, they believe that he'll usher in the Messianic kingdom and rule and reign for Jerusalem. So for them, it's not a debate. It's just debate who it is, right? And we're talking about these in roles. And then we have these two other roles they just mentioned. You have a priest and you have a politician, these two witnesses, okay? Well, in these two witnesses, I think this is critical because they're in the book of Revelations. It's talking about them being involved in the rebuilding of the temple, just as Zerubbabel and Joshua, the high priest, were involved in the rebuilding of the second temple. So is there 4 people that are involved as craftsmen to rebuild the temple and ushering in the Messianic kingdom? Yes, I think so. Just the way they see it, and the way I see it, we're close, but we just haven't put it all together. Are you guys following me on this? Mom, do you understand this theory, what we're getting at, okay?
I think what I've heard about the two Ben Messiahs or whatever was a little different viewpoint. Like one of them was they actually thought it might be 2 separate Messiahs, and one came to die as a suffering, but it was another Messiah that came to reign.
That's right. That's correct. But it doesn't take away from this concept that Messiah ben Joseph has to go and lead a battle into, rebuilding the temple. There's no doubt there's going to be a cataclysmic event that's going to bring in the building of the temple. Something has to happen. And that leadership has to come from the house of Israel, from Joseph. Now, the rest of the world, and even in Christianity, do not recognize the 10 tribes, recognize the role, don't recognize Joseph in their role as they have been for the last 2,700 years. But there has been a role for them. And they will not understand this. Most people will not understand it until the Messiah comes back and they can put the pieces together. That includes believers, Christians. They don't see it. There's a veil that's blinded everybody to this, okay? So as we go back to chapter 9, Zechariah, let's read through it and see if we can see some of these 2 aspects of 2 different Messiahs involved in here and see if we can pick it up ourselves, okay? All right. So starting in chapter 9, verse 1, Matt, can you read 1 through 4?
It says, the oracle of the word of the Lord is against the hand of Hadrach, and Damascus is its resting place. For the Lord has an eye on mankind and on all the tribes of Israel, and on Hamath also, which borders it, Tyre and Sidon, though they are very wise. Tyre has built herself a rampart and heaped up silver like dust, and fine gold like the mud of the streets. But behold, the Lord will strip her of her possessions, and strike down her power on the sea, and she shall be devoured by fire.
Let's introduce some people here. Okay, so in modern study of archaeology and history, and kind of think of the study of people. It's help me out here. The study of people. It just slipped my mind. But anyway, Tyre, Sidon, Gabal, and Byblos. Okay, these 4 cities are considered the 4 Phoenician cities. Okay, they run along the coastline. Tyre is the seat of power. Okay, and of those 4 cities, they before the 10 tribes were destroyed, all of their protection came from the 10 tribes. Okay, their food came from the 10 tribes. The army and their defense came from the 10 tribes. But when that was stripped away by the Assyrians, it left them semi-naked. They made treaties with the Babylonians and made treaties with the Persians and became subject and paid them, and they paid them basically to gold and silver so they can maintain their freedom. But up to this point, they have been allowed freedom of the seas. They've been able to colonize and mine and do the things they have done for a while. but what they have lost, and now they're depending on somebody else for somebody else's army and food. Okay, and so now they're isolated. Okay, that's one group. Now you got this other group called Hamat. Okay, Hamat are Canaanites, and most of these were taken into exile by the Assyrians and taken out toward Afghanistan. Okay, the Arkites, you probably heard of the Arkites. Arak was one of the sons of Canaan as well as Hamat. Now this runs, if you look at a map of Lebanon and Syria, this runs through the Bekaa Valley all the way up toward Tripoli. Okay, and the northern part of Hamat, which is basically borders on near Aleppo. Okay, that will be when Israel gets their inheritance, Hamat will be a northern boundary. Okay, and so somewhere around where Aleppo is today is going to be the northern boundary of Israel. Okay, and they have basically been stripped of their protection, and so they're vulnerable. So what Zechariah is basically doing is he's writing this in around the 450 BC, somewhere in that time frame, right? And when it finally happens, it's going to be 100 years later when they're going to get destroyed. Okay, you guys follow me on this? And we'll get into how, when we get into the next paragraph, I'll tell you how this happens, okay? So Betty, can you read verses 5 through 8?
Ashkelon will see it and be afraid. Gaza too will writhe in great pain, and Ekron, for her expectation, has been confounded. Moreover, the king will perish from Gaza, and Ashkelon will not be inhabited, and a mongrel race will dwell in Ashdod. And I will cut off the pride of the Philistines, and I will remove their blood from their mouth, and their detestable things from between their teeth. Then they also will be a remnant for our God, and be like a clan in Judah, and Ekron like a Jebusite. But I will camp around my house because of an army, because of him who passes by and returns, and no oppressor will pass over them anymore. For now I have seen with my eyes.
So, Matt, can you turn to Zephaniah chapter 2 and read around 4, 5, and 6, I believe it is. Zechariah, let me go. It's turn to we read this a few weeks ago. We went into this, but in Zephaniah 2, starting with verse 4, read 4 and 5 and 6 and 7, 4 through 7. Read those.
It says, "For Gaza shall be deserted, and Ashkelon shall become a desolation. Ashdod's people shall be driven out at noon, and Ekron shall be uprooted. Woe to you, inhabitants of the seacoast, you nation of the Cherethites. The word of the Lord is against you, O Canaan, land of the Philistines, and I will destroy you until no inhabitant is left. And you, O seacoast, shall be pastures with meadows for shepherds and folds for flocks. The seacoast shall become the possession of the remnant of the house of Judah, on which they shall graze, and in the houses of Ashkelon they shall lie down at evening. For the Lord their God will be mindful of them and restore their fortunes."
All right, so what we're reading in 5 through 8 is we're taking those two prophets and those two prophecies and we're bringing them together, okay? So this is a second group. This is a second. So we talked about the Phoenicians, right? And so now we're introduced into the Philistine people. And the Philistines were city-states, just like the Phoenicians. This model, it was known in Greece, Hellas, and along the coast. They had a loose alliance between these city-states, and they had a loose their ethnicity was close, sometimes intermarried between the different houses and groups. And so where the Phoenicians would be related to one group of people, the Philistines would be another, right? We know the Philistines were descendants of Ham, and the Phoenicians too, as well. It's probably a mixture between Shem and Esau. Okay, and according to some different studies, one of the city-states where they found a lot of archaeological evidence of worship and stuff like that along the Phoenician coast, there is evidence that maybe Esau had settled and built one of these city-states. Okay, so what's happening is this prophet is warning of something getting ready to happen in the future. So let me go to find some extra biblical material, all right? And so in somewhere around 356 to 323, in that time frame, we have Alexander the Great pouring his army, is moving south, okay? And his ultimate destination is Egypt. He's going to destroy Egypt's power base. And he's going to go after Egypt before he finally goes after Persia, okay? And so along the way, he has to go through two people. He has to go through the Phoenicians. And up to this point, nobody had ever destroyed Tyre. Now, Tyre has a small little town on the seacoast, but its capital was 2 miles out in the middle of the water in the Mediterranean, with ramparts and water surrounding it. Their ships would come in and out. If they were attacked, they would release their ships to go out and do engagements and swarm. And so the king of Tyre, as mentioned in Ezekiel, was very powerful. He never was completely subdued, and he maintained all his wealth because he was away from anybody. These land armies like the Persians and the Babylonians, they didn't have a navy. All right, they had primarily a land force. And so why this is important is because when Alexander the Great sets his sights on these two people that we just got an oracle on to destroy, he marched down city, state, district, and quickly destroyed each one of them. When he got to Tyre, what he did, and this is very interesting, I think, is he began doing something they had never done before. He began getting stones and rocks, and he had his army and his engineers build a land bridge from the seacoast all the way out to the castle where the king was set up. And he had a small navy, so he kept their navy occupied while his army and his engineers were building this land bridge. All right. And when he finally gets there, they tore the walls down of Tyre, destroyed them, and every man, woman, and child in Tyre was killed. There's nobody survived. Now the other Phoenicians on the land, they took them into slavery, and some scattered. Remember, they had boats. One of the things the Phoenicians had, they had Carthage, was another colony, and that's in Tunisia today. And so many of them escaped Alexander's hand, but the rest of them did not, and he destroyed them, every man, woman, and child. And there was this hate that was boiling up in Alexander the Great against him for some reason, because he was tired of their arrogance and their pride. Here is the oracle that we're getting here. All right. So then he sets his sights on the Phoenicians, but he's got to go through Judea. Okay. And according to many different extra biblical material, the high priest at the time was a man called Yadis. He was in Jerusalem. And he had read what we had studied in Daniel about the destruction of Tyre, the destruction he read about this man coming. So he sent messengers out from Jerusalem to meet Alexander the Great's army. And he showed him the scroll of Daniel, and he showed him what was in it. And he says, "We know you're coming." And they brought great gifts to him. And so Alexander the Great's wrath did not take on Judea, and that's why they were not destroyed. As soon as he bypasses and he moves on toward the Phoenicians, he completely destroyed their cities. And that's what you read in the oracle, okay? Now, where they wound up is he used them as slaves. And so modern day Kosovo, modern day Albania are the descendants of these Philistines that were taken into captivity by Alexander the Great. All right. And after that, then he goes on to Egypt. So as you see right here in Zechariah, when he talks about in the first 4 verses against Tyre and Sidon, and the next one's against Gaza, Ashkelon, etc., it took 100 years for this oracle to be fulfilled. Okay. This would be a long ways off. It's a short-term period when we're talking about how prophecy works, but for them it was another 100 years before this would be culminated. Okay. Any questions on that? Was that too much? It was too much. Okay. So when we talk about these things, there's these prophecies, and some of them have passed and some of them haven't. Unless you know just a little bit of history, this can go over your head real quick. It gets lost, but let's just keep it simple for the first 8 verses. Zechariah is basically writing down the final destruction of the Philistines and the Phoenicians. Okay, that's basically what he's writing down. Alexander the Great was the club that did it. It would just be 100 years later. Okay, does that help a little bit? Okay, I can't hear you, babe. You're all muted out. Okay.
No, that helps a lot.
Okay. All right. So, Mom, if you can read, we're gonna break this down, and we're gonna go into verse 9, 10, and 11. You're gonna read through 13, but we're gonna just do a step at a time. Okay. So start off 9, 10, and 11.
Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. He is just and having salvation, lowly and riding on a donkey, a colt, the foal of a donkey. I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim and the horse from Jerusalem. The battle bow will be cut off. He shall speak peace to the nations. His dominion shall be from sea to sea, and from river to the ends of the earth. As for you also, because the blood of your covenant, I will set your prisoners free from the waterless pit.
Okay, stop right there. Stop right there. All right. So this is one of those prophecies that it takes the time of the first coming and the time of the second coming and intertwines them together. All right. If you're a Jewish sage or rabbi who's trying to study this and you haven't accepted Yeshua as a Messiah or as your Messiah, then what they do here is they have to create 2 Messiahs. Ergo, what we were talking about earlier. Okay. So they realize that at some point he's going to come in peace. Okay. The idea that they came in peace was interpreted in many different ways. So in the first century, okay, you see the confusion. They were not looking for a peaceful Messiah to come and save them on a colt. They were not looking for that. They were looking for a rider on a horse to come in battle. Okay. So where did they get did they get the riding of a horse coming on coming for war, coming to destroy their enemies? Where do you think they got that from, and how this idea in the first century among even the apostles themselves were looking for this warrior Messiah? Where do you think they got that from? What chapter, book in the Bible?
Would that be in Isaiah, I guess, 63 to 66 and Zechariah 14?
Exactly. That's exactly right. And what's interesting about that, because we're going to read Isaiah 63 a little bit, there's going to be some language in it that you're going to pick up on. Times and seasons will be helpful when you read Isaiah 63. As we go down into this, more into the scripture verse, you're going to see the times of the seasons on when this all take place. Now, who was king over the Jews in the first century?
The Romans. Oh, King Herod.
Okay, from what was his ethnicity, or what was his race or ethnic? Who was he?
Edomite.
He was
Yeah,
Jewish, right?
No, he was a son of Esau, and the only reason why he was allowed to even be in the nation, rule, and it was allowed, and well, it was compromised by the high priest, but as long as he got circumcised, then they allowed him to be king over them. Okay?
Oh, okay.
All right. Now, why did the Romans put Herod in over the Judeans? Now, you may not know this, and most people don't know it, but the Jewish sages write about this, as they believe the Roman Caesars, Augustus, Julius, these Caesars, they were also Edomians. They were all descendants of Esau. And so they put one of their own, a lesser kingdom, in charge of the nation, because they knew he would be loyal to them, because they were distant kin, but they were in blood. Okay. And so when we get to Isaiah 63, we're going to get ready to read it. This all starts to make sense why they're looking for a conquering king, And they weren't looking for somebody coming in peace on a donkey, right? All right, let's go quickly turn to Isaiah 63. All right, so as we read it, I'm gonna give you some key words. You tell me which season, time and season, appointed time, we think this is going to take place as I read it, okay? I'll go slow and easy. Verse 1. Who is this who comes from Edom in crimson garments from Basra? Basra is the capital of Edomium, or Edom. He is splendid in his apparel, marching in the greatness of his strength. Listen to the key words here. Marching in his greatness of strength. That's an army right there. It is I speaking in righteous, mighty to save. Why is your apparel red and your garments like the one who treads in the winepress? Okay, what's the time of the season when the wine presses are working?
In the fall.
In the fall, okay. I have trodden the winepress alone, and from the people no one was with me. I trod them in anger, I trampled them in my wrath. Their life was splattered on my garments and stained all my apparel. For the day of vengeance was in my heart, and my year of redemption had come. That's a key word. I want you might want to write that down mentally, because it also tells you a season. What
A
is that?
jubilee. A jubilee.
That's right. So had come. I looked, but there was no one to help. I was appalled, but there was no one to uphold. So my own arm brought salvation, Yeshua, and my wrath upheld me. I trampled down the people in my anger. I made them drunk in my wrath, and I poured out their lifeblood on the earth. Okay, so first century, you have zealots, you have people all over Israel waiting for this Messiah. That's the whole story of Barabbas. He was trying to instigate a fight to prompt this Messiah to come in there and come save them. And there was multiple attempts from about the time Herod took over all the way into the destruction of the temple. There was multiple men, semi-messiahs, that were trying to instigate a fight with the Romans, with the hope that that out of that their Messiah coming for war would appear. Okay, go back and read the questions when he says, when Yeshua says to his apostles, who do they say I am, right? And who do you think I am? Those are questions all related to this story right here of which Messiah is going to appear. Now, for a Christian, a believer, they're going to say, oh, this makes sense. Yeah, Messiah's coming. He's going to come again. It all fits in a nice little puzzle, or fairly nice in a puzzle if you're a Christian. But for a Jew, it doesn't, because you missed him, right? And so now that this warrior king hasn't come, I've got a problem. Let's go back to Zechariah. Behold, your king is coming to you, righteous and having salvation. Is he humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of donkey? Okay, so there we go, right there. It's telling us that he's going to come in peace. All right, well, now it makes a little more sense. Why? Why does it make more sense that a Messiah coming for peace is more acceptable today than it was 2,000 years ago? Let me ask it that way.
Why is it more acceptable to see a Messiah coming for peace today? Because we have wars going on.
How about this? Did Israel have sovereignty in the first century over their nation?
No.
Okay. Do they have sovereignty over their nation today?
Yes.
Yeah, they do.
Yes.
Yeah, they have sovereignty today.
Yeah.
So if you don't have this oppressive person coming over you, right? Or who's got his army all around your capital city and around in the provinces, then there's no oppressor. You've got peace. Then he can come in on a donkey, and everybody's going to be happy, right? Okay. So here presents a problem. Scripture prophesies about a coming Messiah false Messiah. We've labeled him Antichrist, but a false Messiah. And what is that false Messiah being told? What is he prophesied to come in? Come in peace. He's going to come in peace. This false Messiah will usher in a peace. This is what Christians have been studying this for a long, long time. We should get the confusion. Mom, do you see this? What we're talking about? We have been talking about this false Messiah offering peace to everyone, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Okay. And now we got Zechariah saying the Jews have been waiting for somebody. 2,000 years ago, they wanted their Isaiah 63, Messiah. 2,000 years later, they're now looking for a Zechariah chapter 9 Messiah.
Well, it does make sense that they were looking for a king. I mean, somebody to have vengeance, because they were, the Romans had them. I could see why they were looking for a king that was going to, have vengeance.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
That makes sense.
Now, verse 10 is a conundrum. I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim and the war horse from Jerusalem. Okay, so let's talk about it. Zechariah is. This is my point where, if you don't understand the two houses and the power of Joseph and what he's accomplished and that he formed nations, if you don't get that element of scripture, then this verse will not make sense, because in the first century, did they know Ephraim? Did the Jews know where Ephraim was as a whole? Did most people know who Ephraim was? No. Okay. Yeah. In the time of Zechariah, around 450 BC, where was Ephraim at this point?
Were they in captivity?
Yeah, they're in captivity. They were exiled. They were still under the curse of Ezekiel, that 390 years. So that 390 years still was covering them. So they hadn't been released from that. So they wouldn't grow into the force they would be at the end of that 390 years. So here we got a problem. I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim and the war horse from Jerusalem. How does this fit in? Okay. Where is Ephraim? Right now, Ephraim is not in the land. And you can ask 90% of the Jews and ask them, has Ephraim returned? And they will tell you, no, he has not. So how can you cut off Ephraim if he hasn't returned? How can you talk about Ephraim in the first century if he wasn't there? How can you talk about Ephraim in the 4th or 5th century BC when he was still in captivity? There's a problem with that prophecy right there. So this is either going to force you to disregard the prophecy or accept that Ephraim is a force to be reckoned with at the end of time. So let's go to Obadiah chapter 1. Real quick, let's go there. Obadiah 1. There is only one chapter, but Obadiah 1. So this whole chapter is about the eventual destruction at the end of times of Esau because of what they did in the destruction of the first temple. Okay. So when we come down to, let's come down to verse 15. I'll start there. For the day of the Lord is near upon all nations. As you've done, it shall be done to you. Your deeds shall return on your own head, for as you have drunk on my holy mount, Esau, so all the nations shall drink continuously, and they shall drink and swallow. And shall be as though they have never been, but in Mount Sion there shall be those who escape, and it shall be holy, and the house of Jacob possess their own possessions. That's Zechariah chapter 2. They get their land back. Okay. The house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame, and the house of Esau stubble. So to not be so cryptic here, basically the force that's going to destroy Esau at the end of times will be Joseph, Ephraim. You got that? Okay. So Zechariah is saying that Ephraim will be cut off, but at the very, very end, on the day of the Lord, Joseph is back into the picture. Okay. Let me say that. I'm going to go slowly. Okay. In Zechariah, it says that Ephraim is going to be cut off. Okay, before the day of the Lord. But in Obadiah, at the day of the Lord, Joseph is he's going to rise back up. Okay. So this is really important when you look at Daniel's 70th week. Okay. I want to kind of build a picture here. You have the Great Tribulation, and then you have the time prior to. Okay. I do believe that when we look at the 4 craftsmen, the 4 people who are going to build this temple, right? I think Joseph is intricately, politically involved in there, because Joseph is a strong force at the end of time, like the United States. Okay, that's number one. Number 2 is that there's Israel or Judah themselves are in charge of their own sovereignty, and they're going to bring in basically 2 anointed ones are going to help rebuild the 3rd temple. Okay, just like they did in time of Zechariah. There are 2 anointed ones help rebuild it. Okay, but when this false Messiah, which in my opinion, I think Esau is going to give birth to the false Messiah. I've always believed this. This is why so many verses are about the final destruction of Esau. So it must be in his seed that's going to do this. So if Ephraim has to be basically crushed, put into captivity, hurt, brought down, okay, in order for the false Messiah to rise up. You follow me? In order for him to set up his throne during the Great Tribulation, Joseph must go down, Esau must go up. Okay? But that doesn't mean it's a complete knockout of Ephraim, because Obadiah 1 says he comes back in the very end and destroys Esau. You see how these things are intertwining together? There's a picture. It's starting to come together, what we're getting ready to see. And that's why when we study about the 2 houses, it's important to understand they both have a role to the very, very end, until the Messiah takes both sticks and puts them in his hand. Okay? All right, let's go back to Zechariah 9. Any questions on this at this point? Your computer battery's running out and you need to leave because all right, well, let it fade out, Mom. When it goes, it goes.
I'm on about 15, so I'm going. I didn't want to be surprised. And it's
We'll be
way
done
in
at
the other
4:30.
room. So I'm sorry, but yeah, I just better, I have to go plug it in, and I'll just go ahead and listen
Okay.
on the recording. Okay, I'm sorry.
Sounds good. All right, see you later, Mom. All right,
Bye-bye.
so when it says in verse 10, his rule shall be from sea to sea, and from the river to the ends of the earth. Okay, what river is he referring to?
Well, the Euphrates.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
And-
river is usually the Euphrates when it says the river.
Yes, exactly. And in my opinion, southern Iraq is made up of Esau today. That's the people of Basra, right? And so he defeats his enemy, Esau, right? And so that means he takes control of the river. And so from the river, from sea to sea, to the river, to the ends of the earth, that means including the United States and Australia and Japan and, into Antarctica and everywhere, the whole planet, he's going to rule. But I find this connection to the river is very interesting, because it ties directly into Isaiah 63, when the Messiah is going to begin his rule. And then we know he comes in the eastern gate, because it tells us in scripture he comes from the east, right?
Mhm.
So the Euphrates being to the east, he destroys Esau, conquers, and from the river he begins his movement into the land of Eden. Okay. All right. Let's go quickly to Joel chapter 2 and see if we can tie some of this together. All right, I want to just jump to the beginning here. We're going to go, and I'm just going to and then we're going to jump a couple scriptures. Okay. So blow a trumpet in Sion, sound an alarm on my holy mount. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of the Lord is coming. So the day of the Lord is an understanding that that's going to be a Yom Kippur at some point in the future. It is a day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and thick darkness. Like blackness, there's a spread upon the mountains, a great and powerful people there like has never been before, nor will be again after them. through the years of all generations, fire. So in other words, this army is going to be pretty powerful, but this is not an army that this is an army that hates. It, to me, in my opinion, this army that we're talking about is the army of Ezekiel 38 and 39. Okay. And before I do this, let me stop real quick. Can you guys keep your fingers there on this?
Mhm.
I don't want to confuse you, but to tie in the fact that Ephraim has to go low before it comes back up again. There's another verse that parallels that helps build this case. Okay, if you go into Isaiah 17, in Isaiah 17, it says there's an oracle concerning Damascus. Okay, and it says, "See, Damascus will cease to be a city, and it'll become a heap of ruins. Her towns will be deserted forever. There'll be places for flocks which will lie down, and no one will make them afraid." Verse 3 is what I'll get at. "The fortress will disappear from Ephraim, and the kingdom from Damascus, and the remnant of Aram will be like the glory of the house of Israel, says the Lord of hosts." All right, so this happened at one point a long time ago. The city of Damascus that we see today is not in the place it is today. It was on the Euphrates River. Okay. Very important. That was destroyed, okay? And Ephraim had, before they were destroyed by the Assyrians, they had their citadels and their fortresses, and they basically had like a military outpost in Damascus, okay? They had sovereignty over the Arameans that ruled over that city. And when the Assyrians crossed over and destroyed it and pulled all their stuff down and destroyed the Arameans, they also destroyed Ephraim's fort that was in it. So here's an example. Like, if you go to the Philippines, you got Clark Air Force Base, you've got Subic Bay, you got Naval Base. You go to Panama, you got Fort Clayton, you got all these bases. If you go to Djibouti, we have a base there. If you go to northern Syria in the Hasaka region, we have a base there. So in those days, okay, there was a base that they had set up in Damascus, okay? But in the future, whatever basis that the Ephraimites have will be destroyed by this false Messiah. Okay, that's what I'm kind of getting at. So this is a secondary verse to Zechariah 9, showing that Ephraim has to be brought down for a time before they get risen back up. I hope I'm not confusing anybody. There's some moving parts, but it's really not that confusing. Okay. All right, let's go back to Joel chapter 2. All right, so we witness this army, right? And it's coming up on in verse 4, so their appearance is like appearance of horses, and like a war horses run as we rumbling of chariots. They leap on the tops of the mountains like the crackling of a flame of fire, devouring the stubble like a powerful army and drawn up for battle. So there's this enemy, okay? There's an enemy that is very powerful, that I believe Joel chapter 2 is talking about the enemy that is read in 38 and 39. Okay, I think they're the same. Does anybody have any? Do you guys agree with that? Not really have an opinion on it, or just can see the connection?
Don't really have an opinion on it.
Okay. All right.
Don't really know
Okay.
anything about it.
So jump down to verse 15. Blow the trumpet in Sion, consecrate a fast, call a solemn assembly, gather the people, consecrate the congregation, assemble the elders, gather the children, even nurse the infants. Let the bridegroom leave his room and the bride her chamber, between the vestibule and the altar. Okay, just to know what that is. Okay, in Hebrew, the word mizbech is altar. Okay, and the word vestibule. And what, Matt? Do you have another translation for that? Between the vestibule, you have some other word.
So
Porch?
is that verse 16 or 17? Oh, between the
17.
vestibule and the altar. Yeah, that's what it says.
Mine has porch. Mine has
Porch.
porch.
Okay,
Where,
all right.
where are you reading?
Just you don't have to go there. It's in Joel chapter 2.
Okay.
What I want to get at here, why I'm drawing this into this whole story here, is that in Joel chapter 2, with his army coming down on Jerusalem, pouring into the valley of Jehoshaphat, which is the Kidron Valley. While that's happening, the priests and the people of Judah at the end of the Great Tribulation are gathering themselves inside the temple between the porch, which is the Olam, and the Olam are the steps going into the holy place. That's what that is. Okay, this is important. So when I hear like Monty Judah say, well, we don't need a temple. We just need an altar, right? But here's a problem. You can't have, well, you can, but you can't have steps to nowhere. Your steps, your Olam, must go somewhere specific, right? You got to have it. And so the reason why you have steps is because you built this temple. Okay. And you got to have an altar, which is Monty Judah talks about. Yeah, you got to have an altar, and they're going to bring in the altar, and they're going to start the sacrifices again. But I think they're going to also have this temple in place. It's not just going to be an altar. And you can't just put the altar anywhere. Anybody who knows anything about the rebuilding of the temple, you just can't put it anywhere you want. It has to go in the place that it was designed, and according to the designs of Ezekiel in chapter 40 through 46, 45, that it has to be that way. So when the Lord returns, this conquering king, this Messiah ben David that comes in to destroy, there's going to be a temple and a high priest that is going to be taking the people at a fast, which that fast is Yom Kippur, which is the day of the Lord, which is going to be a jubilee, which is the day of return where the captives are set free. You see, all this happens at one time. Okay, so when we go back to Zechariah, tie all these verses in together, you see that they're sequential and tied into the appointed times. Okay.
Hey, Rob,
Yeah.
would you consider Joel chapter 2? Would that be the Battle of Revelation 19?
Yes.
Would that be? It would be.
Yes. And I think you and I have discussed this when it comes to Ezekiel 38 and 39. I think we're looking at two different battles. Okay.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah,
you have a
definitely
battle
is.
to me at the beginning of the Great Tribulation, and then you have this battle at the end of the Great Tribulation. Okay. I think, but both of them are going to be by the same bad guy, right? This guy, God, chief prince over Meshach and Tubal. It's the same guy. Okay. He's going to rise to power, lose, and then he's going to come back, and there's going to be a final fallout. Okay. By the way, I would just dismiss what's going on in Ukraine and Russia right now as just a thing. If there's a fight in the Congo, or there's a fight in South America, there hasn't been, but let's say there is, right? Or somewhere in Southeast Asia, it's not as relevant as what's going on, because I'm gonna give you a verse. Let me go find it, and I'm gonna give you a verse that is going to catch your attention. Okay. If you want, turn to Psalm 120, verse 5. I know I'm jumping all over the place, but I want to show you something that just don't dismiss things, because and one of the things that it's kind of important to me, and I think I kind of emphasizes, is when God laid out the table of nations in Genesis 10. We don't dismiss those names, because those names are relative to through the prophets throughout the whole Old Testament, through the Tanakh, right? And so all those peoples, those names that are mentioned there, are going to come back over and over and over and over. And so when you see verses that seem really kind of, where did that come from? Okay, they're tie-in verses that tie into the Genesis 10 and these table of nations and who these different players are. All right, so we have something I wanted to bring that. It says, verse 3, it says, "What shall be given to you, and what more shall be done to you, you deceitful tongue? A warrior sharps arrows with glowing clothes of the broom tree." And then verse 5, "Woe is to me that I'm an alien in Meshach, that I must live, or in some different translation, that I must live among the tents of Kedar. Kedar and Meshach are tied together by King David in this song. Okay. Now, this will, 1,000 Bible scholars will read this and dismiss this completely as irrelevant. What does that have to do with me? What does that? Okay. We have two people at that King David is saying is super dangerous. And we know Meshach is mentioned in Ezekiel 38 and 39, right? Chief prince over Meshach and Tubal. But who's Kedar? Well, Kedar is one of the sons of Ishmael. And one of the interesting things about Kedar is Muhammad, the father of Islam, he claims to be a descent from Kedar. And let's take a step further. The Chechens that are fighting alongside the Russians in Ukraine right now, you know what they call themselves? Kedarites, from the word Kedar. So don't dismiss isolated verses as having no meaning, because God sees who these people are and their tendencies and what they do, right? So when you start looking at all these verses, it's kind of like, well, what does that have to do with the whole picture? Well, there's a tie-in right here. Okay. So when I say don't dismiss what's happening in Ukraine and Russia, I think it's setting the stage. In my opinion, it's setting the stage for the Daniel 70th week and the tribulation. It's building toward that. All right, let's go back. And then we're going to tie this up. Let's go to verse 14 and 15, 16 to 17. Let's finish that. Everybody's read, right? We don't have very many of us. Okay, I'll read this last bit. Then the Lord will appear over them, and his arrows will go forth like lightning. The Lord God will sound the trumpet and will march forth to the whirlwinds of the south. The Lord of hosts will protect them, and they shall devour and tread down the sling stones. And they shall drink and roar as if drunk with wine. Okay, notice that wine is brought back into the conversation again. So when you start seeing wine, tie that back to Isaiah 63. Tie that back into the time and the seasons, okay? So with the return of the Lord of hosts, the Messiah, when he comes back, he's going to come back during the fall feast, okay? There is so many little clues in every single prophet's words about his return. And when you understand the appointed times, I guess everybody here gets it, but most people don't, right? And if somebody listens to this recording later on, if you don't know the appointed times and you don't understand them, then every prophecy in scripture will not work unless you understand it, okay? It's that simple. You can write the greatest book, like Hal Lindsey, late great Planet Earth. He had no clue about the appointed times of the Lord. Okay. And he influenced a lot of people in the 70s and 80s. A lot, right, Mom? A ton of people were influenced by him and his prophet, but he never mentions the day of the Lord and ties it in Yom Kippur. He never understands about the freeing of captives tied into the Feast of Jubilees. He doesn't get that. And so you can sit there and be the greatest author. In college, I had a book. It's called The Game Nations Play. It was a fantastic thing I did in college, right? You had to become a country and you had to become somebody and you had to make treaties and you build up and you fought wars and you made peace treaties. And I learned a lot in that class. But you can't know how nations play, the nations that God created, unless you know the appointed times that God created before he made the nations, right? The game was set into place way beforehand. Go ahead, Mom.
Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt. I thought you was through, but don't dismiss what God can use, because if you know something of Jonathan Cahn's story, he was, I think, a really young, maybe 9 to 12, and he was really into science fiction stuff. So for some reason, he read the Hal Lindsey's book.
Really? Did he really?
Yeah, he did. And it really got his attention and got him to thinking about, Christian religion and all, because at that time he professed already that he was an atheist. He gave up on his own Jewish religion. So his conversion was really hilarious. But when you talk about how lengthy that was, when he thought he was getting a science fiction book, so he was all into it.
Well, when you read, the same thing happened when you sent me the Left Behind book, the first one by what's those guys' names? I think I threw all of them out. I don't have any more of those books, but when you sent that to me, what it did is it spurred me to start studying prophecy, which got me into understanding more about the Hebrew roots of our faith, and which led to me to start understanding about the house of Judah and the house of Israel. And so, yes, out of a science fiction book by the Left Behind guys, you're right. It did spur me into really studying scripture and going, all right, I get that you saying this, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 says this, but I'm not seeing what you're seeing, right?
I didn't either. After reading 2 of them, I'm like, nah, he's way off.
Well, I think I read 8 of them. So I was really, I mean, it was entertaining reading, but yeah, clearly he doesn't, there's another author that didn't understand the times of the seasons, the appointed times of Moedim, as we know it in Hebrew, right? Did not get it. So you and I will pick up these buzzwords like the day of the Lord, release of captives, and just little words that are triggers to understand they're defining what these appointed times are. Okay. That's going to help you interpret some of the stuff when it may not be as clear when you go across it. It's kind of like a speed bump. When I read in the day of the Lord, it's a speed bump. I stop. Okay. Let me get context. Let me understand. Are we talking about the day of his return, or are we talking about some other day, right? It's a speed bump. All right, let's keep going. Now, verse 15, the Lord of hosts will protect them, and they shall devour and tread down the sling stones, and they shall drink and roar as if drunk with wine, and be full like a bowl, drenched like the corners of the altar. Okay, the corner of the altar is tying into Joel chapter 2, right? On the day of the Lord, verse 16, their God will save them as the flock of his people. All right, stop right there. Let's go back to Joel. Keep your finger there. Let's go back to Joel chapter 2. Verse 17. Between the vestibule and the altar, let the priests, the ministers of the Lord, weep and say, spare your people, Lord, and make not your heritage a reproach, a byword among the nations. Why should they say among the peoples, where is their God? Then the Lord became jealous for his land and had pity on his people. The Lord answered and said to his people, behold, I am sending to you grain, wine, and oil, and you will be satisfied, and I will no more make you a reproach among the nations. Okay, back to Zechariah chapter 9. We just read that on the day of the Lord, the God will save them. Do you see the tie-in? Okay, we've got a tie-in. We know that God is going to save them, but it takes the high priest, one of those 4 craftsmen, to take the nation, put them around the altar, get the service going, do the sacrifices, do his responsibility on Yom Kippur, the fasting, the prayers, call on the Lord to save them, and then God saves them on that day. Okay. One of the 4 craftsmen in the story is that high priest. That high priest that's in the temple the day of the Lord. Okay, the 2 witnesses, the 2 anointed ones, other 2 craftsmen, they're not there. They've died and resurrected up. Right? We know that from Scripture. Okay, and so the 4th craftsman is who? The Messiah. He's coming in. He's the 4th craftsman. Even if you read in Proverbs chapter 8, he's referred to as a craftsman.
I think I heard somebody commenting recently that we always call Jesus and Joseph carpenters, but the word should be craftsman or craftsman.
That's right. That's
right.
So
they weren't just regular builders, they were craftsmen.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah, and if you notice, I made this as a tangent, but we have a false teaching that came into the 10 tribes through a an organization who made false oaths, and they're very similar to what tempted the 10 tribes during it's the Masons. The Masons are craftsmen, right? It's the same thing. It comes from craftsmen who were building these churches all over England, right? That's where the Masons comes from. But they became a secret society. They worship, or they make an oath to this Behemoth, which is basically a demon goat god. And so there's this false teaching that comes in into the 10 tribes again at the end of the age, and pulls people away, like did happen during the days of Elijah. They were called craftsmen. Satan always tries to corrupt his people. He tries to confuse and bring in a different teaching, or get people's eyes off the true craftsman, which is Messiah ben David, which is the Messiah Yeshua, as far as we're concerned, right? He's always going to try to get people's eyes off the truth. Okay. And look how many people have been lied to through that whole organization. We have a couple people in our congregation that their fathers were in it, and they were heavily steeped into that stuff, which was a lie. It's a complete lie. All right, let's keep going. I'm gonna read verse 16 again. On the day of the Lord, the God will save them as a flock of his people. As for like the jewels of a crown, they shall shine on his land. For how great is his goodness, and how great is his beauty! Grain shall make the young men flourish, and the new wine the young women. Okay, so what is part of every offering? Every single offering that's brought before the Lord, what do you have? It's a must. It must be brought.
Wine and grain.
They're right. That's exactly right. Wine and grain. So at the end, he's got, and so Joel chapter 6 says maybe he will leave something behind. And Zechariah chapter 9:17 says he is going to leave it behind. Okay. See how all this stuff ties in. Let's stop right there. We'll do some Q&A. Go ahead and stop the recording.